Hey there and welcome to the Code Wrinkles channel. In this video, I would like to talk to you about a topic that I know is very important and it seems to be very difficult, but in this video, I will make it very easy and simple for you. And this topic is obviously authentication and authorization in an ASP.NET Core Web API. When it comes to authentication and authorization, usually we hear a lot of people talk about Auth 2.0 and OpenID Connect, which is okay because we need them, we need those standards and they are important. However, if you want to understand them, you need to first really understand how it actually works and how can we get a very basic authentication and authorization setup in an ASP.NET Core Web API without actually thinking about OAuth and OpenID Connect. And there is one thing that I can promise you. By the time you will play around with the solution that you will see here in this video and will really understand all the parts that are part of it, then I can promise you that OAuth or the concept of OAuth and OpenID Connect will be much easier to understand for you. So in this video, we'll just implement authentication and authorization using ASP.NET Core Identity and using the default authorization mechanisms that we have in ASP.NET Core. So what we'll implement is a registration endpoint because obviously in our application, we probably want to also register some users. We'll also have a login endpoint so that we are able to log in into our application. And then we'll have also some APIs with products in which we will see how we can implement authorization and use roles, for instance, to authorize certain requests or not. Before we dive into code, however, please know that in this video there will be a lot of code shown. And all the Code Wrinkles members on an ambassador tier will receive the source code for this video and all other videos, obviously, right after I upload this video. So if you want to get access to the source code for this video and have really this entire solution that you can really take and really copy paste into your API and just really set up authentication and authorization in a matter of just minutes, then become a Code Wrinkles member on the Ambassador tier and check the membership tab on the Code Wrinkles channel for instructions on how you can access the source code for this video. Now let's move over to Rider and let's see what I have prepared for you. So here we are, and this is a very basic ASP.NET Core Web API using controllers in which we have implemented authentication and authorization. But I would like to really walk you through it step by step, from what I would consider to be the beginning. And let's start from the app settings.json files, because there are some things that are important here. Obviously, I have already added the connection string. We will need a database, and I'm using the MS SQL local DB server. I have already created a database. So if you just want to also code along, make sure that you have also a database and you add the connection string. However, the next part that's actually important is these JWT settings. And these here are some application settings that we will need to use when it comes to generate and issue JSON Web Tokens on ourselves, like in our own application. And we will need a signing key, which needs to be a 32 long character string. And here basically I just really generated a GUID and just replaced the dashes or deleted the dashes, and I resulted, or I ended up having this very simple string. And this is what we will use as a signing key for our credentials when we sign the token, and we'll see and we'll look into that just in a few seconds. Then we also need to define the issuer, like who is the issuer of this token. In our case, I have called this application Auth Basics API, and this will be considered as the issuer. And then we have this concept of audiences. Now the audience defines who this token is actually intended for. That could be an array because you could have a web client, you can have a mobile client for your API, you can maybe even have a desktop client for your API. And all of this would be consumers. So if you have several applications, you would have here in this audiences basically several different other strings here. But in my case, my only consumer of the API will be the Swagger UI. And that's why I have used this here audiences, as I have just defined this Swagger client, and basically that's it. Now, the reason why I have added this as a JSON property in our app settings.json is because we'll need to access this type of information when we run our application and use the options pattern to actually read the values that we have here. That's why I have here also this options folder, and as you can see here, I have created a class which is called JWT settings. So if you look at the name of this JSON object and to the name of this class, they are actually exactly the same. So they need to be a perfect match in order for the default ASP.NET Core configuration binding to work. Now, in these JWT settings, you will see that I have just very simple properties that correspond to the different JSON properties that we have in app settings.json. So we have the signing key, we have the issuer, and we have the string array, which I have called audiences. By the way, also the names here of our properties need to match the names that we have specified here in our JSON properties in app settings.json. The next thing that we need to think about is we need a way to actually generate our JSON web tokens ourselves, and this is a very important step. For this, I have here in the services folder created a new class which is called identity service. The name might not be the best one, I agree with that, but the idea here is that what we do here is we use the JWT settings to inject them using the options pattern basically in our constructor of this identity service. And then we, well, do some checks and throw if things are null in our values, so from our options pattern. And then basically for the key, we encode this basically 2 bytes. Now on this service, I also have this private property. You might also go for a private field, so I have really no problem with that. But in this case, it's a property of type JWT security token handler. And this you'll find in the namespace system identity model tokens JSON WT. That is actually very important because this JWT security token handler is the object that will help us actually generate a token. Then we have here two very simple methods that are public. One is create a security token, and here we get a claims identity as an incoming parameter. And I will talk a little bit more about the claims identity when we will move to the registration and login endpoints to understand exactly, okay, what are these claims actually and how do we use them? Because there are also bound a little bit, and we will see to ASP.NET Core Identity and some things that we need to do there. But generally, a claims identity is just a provider or a holder of some type of information, or simply explained, claims. Now, the idea here is that with this claims identity, I have here this private method that I use to get token descriptor, because what we need to get is, or to create this idea of a security token descriptor. Now, the security token descriptor is nothing else and something that describes our token. Now here for the subject, we need the claims identity, and that's why we need to take it as an incoming parameter there. But then here we can set things like, for instance, expiration, the audience. We can also set it from our settings. The issuer, we will set it also from our settings. And the very important thing here is the signing credentials. And here we create a new signing credentials, and we use this symmetric security key. We have this byte array that we have basically created here in this constructor by reading the key that we have from our JWT settings. And with this, we can create these signing credentials. And these signing credentials are used basically to sign this token. And the same signing credentials will actually be also used to validate the token so that the token is valid. We need to match, or the signing credential needs to match. And we'll see just in a few seconds how exactly this ties together. But for now, the main concept is that this class is actually just a helper service, I would even say, that just allows us to actually create a JSON web token. Till now, it has nothing to do with ASP.NET Core Identity, with Auth, OpenID Connect, or any of these concepts. It's just a way that we can use in ASP.NET Core or in .NET for that matter to create a JSON web token. That mostly is with the setup that we need, or the additional setup that we need to get all this functionality that we want in our application. So slowly we are moving to also get into this idea of using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity. And here we'll go in this data folder, and here I have created this AppDbContext. Now, the core principle here is that if you use, or you will all obviously have your own DB context, but if you also want to use Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity, and get all the default identity tables that you need in order to work with ASP.NET Core Identity, you need to inherit from IdentityDbContext. Now, IdentityDbContext is part of Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework core package. So you definitely need to install this package first before being able to actually inherit from that. And since we are talking about NuGet packages, let me go here to manage NuGet packages, and let's check what packages do we have installed in our application. And obviously there are some packages that come by default, which this is Microsoft ASP.NET Core Open API and Swashbuckle. But we have then also this Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication JWT Bearer. So this is also a package that you need to install. And we have the ASP.NET Core Identity Entity Framework Core. And we then obviously have the needed Entity Framework Core packages. But one thing is here, you don't see any Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity package. Now, the thing is that in a lot of tutorials on documentations that you might find on different blogs out there, you will often see that you also need to install a Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity package. This is not true anymore. I think for already 3 versions of .NET, it is by default in ASP.NET Core, so you don't need to install anything additionally. And now that we have all this kind of setup, let's see how we can actually bind everything together and how we can configure authentication and authorization in our application. And for that, I have here in this extensions folder another class, which is a web application builder extensions. And here there are some things that I do. And here my methods are obviously not the cleanest ones. They are fairly long, but I wanted to keep them explicitly very procedural so that we understand exactly step by step what we want to do. So if you want to adapt this in your application and, well, try to make it cleaner, you can definitely improve that. So I'm totally aware of that. Now, the first thing that we need is obviously to get and to read the configurations of JWT settings. And since this is a static method, we need to do this a little bit differently. So we use this builder configuration bind and see exactly, okay, this is the configuration that we want to bind. Then we get the section from that configuration, and then we configure the JWT settings. Now, then comes the important part. Here we have the first thing that we need to do, because obviously we want first to be able to authenticate users. So this would instruct ASP.NET Core that, hey, whenever we have some requests, okay, and if I ask if this user is authenticated, you need to know that you need to check if the user is authenticated using JWT Bearer or JWT Bearer. That's why when we add authentication, we add the default authentication scheme, the default scheme, and the default challenge scheme to the JWT Bearer default authentication scheme. And in the end, this is nothing else than a string. But this already instructs ASP.NET Core basically that whenever a request comes in and it tries to check if that request is, well, authenticated or not, then it will try to see if you have a JWT Bearer token in the headers of that request. And if you have something like that, then it will create the entire claims principal and it will set the context.user authenticated to true and so on and so forth. But if you don't do that, ASP.NET Core will not know exactly, okay, how can I do this? Now, there is a second step to this problem, because, okay, here we have instructed that we want to use authentication with JSON Web Tokens, but then since we receive a JSON Web Token, we also need a way to kind of like validate it. So is this token valid or not? And to validate this token, there are some things that we can define here in this add.JWTBearer method. Like for instance, that we want to save the token, but then we have this token validation parameters, which is a new object of type token validation parameters. And here you can see that it's kind of like, from my point of view, very straightforward. Okay, validate issuer signing key. We set this to true. And this means that it will validate the issuer key. Now here we read once again the key that we have in our app settings.json and we convert it to a byte array, and this would be the issuer signing key. So when ASP.NET Core will try to validate a token that it finds in the header, it will also check, for instance, if the signing key is the same, or if the signing key is valid. If not, obviously, then the token will not be validated correctly. Then we can specify that, hey, we want to also validate the issuer, and the issuer, the correct issuer that we want to have should be the issuer that we have in these JWT settings. We also can validate the audience, and here we validate the entire audiences. We can require the expiration time to be false and the validate lifetime, because we also want to validate the lifetime of the token. So if the token was issued a long time ago and the expiration, well, time has passed, we don't want this token to be considered valid, obviously. So that's why we have this validate lifetime that we set to true. But then we also need to wire everything up with ASP.NET Core Identity, because ASP.NET Core Identity allows us to create basically application users, which are called identity user in ASP.NET Core Identity, which allows us to kind of like sign in user, sign out user, which allows us to kind of like also do a lot of other stuff with the users, like adding claims for those users, which we will see just in a few seconds, like adding roles for that specific users or for users, and so on and so forth. And then we also need to call this add roles, because we want to have the ability to add services to our API that are able, or through which we are able to control, to add new roles to the application, to add users to existing roles, and so on and so forth. And the sign-in manager, which will be kind of like responsible for signing the users in. And we also tell here with add entity framework stores, so we tell to Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity that, hey, we use entity framework core for persistence. And basically that's why it will look for this app.dbContext that inherits from IdentityDbContext, and it will know exactly what tables it needs to create when you migrate the database for the very first time. Now, in this class, I have another option, which is, by the way, very important because we probably, or you will probably use, at least in development mode, Swagger. Now, Swagger basically by default, it doesn't really support JWT authentication, so it doesn't really know how to do that. However, we can configure our Swagger UI to also do that. So therefore, I have this method here, add Swagger. It is an extension method on the iService collection in this case. And here, when we have this add Swagger gen, we have different options where we can specify the Swagger doc, which is the v1 in this case. We can create a new open API info for the title and for the version. And then we can option and have this add security definition. And this add security definition is very important because we can call it here bearer. That's a name that we give to this definition. But there here we can kind of like specify different things. Like for instance, what we want to have the header basically, or we want to use the header as a place where we kind of like want to use our tokens. So it basically instructs Swagger that whenever it does a call to an endpoint, it should take the token that you can provide, as you will see, and it should place it in a header. There we have a description, a name, which is the authorization, the type, which is HTTP, then the bearer format, which is JSON Web Token, and the scheme, which is bearer. That's what we usually use. And then we also need to add this option add security requirement. And well, basically that's how you need to configure Swagger. It's what we need to do. Create this new open API security scheme with a new open API reference. And yeah, we just give it the ID of bearer, and we also need to create this empty new string array. So we definitely need to do that, otherwise it will not work. And then we just return the service collections after everything has been added. Now, since we have everything basically wired up from an, let's call it, infrastructure perspective, let's move over and see how we actually implement authentication and authorization. Now, for the authentication part, we have this accounts controller, and on this accounts controller, we have basically two different methods. Now, first of all, we have this register method because we usually need the ability to register users. And here I have created a model for this register user that I have kind of like defined here, which is just a string email, password, the first name, last name, and the role. And we see that role is, well, could be administrator or it could be user. Once again, the methods that you see here in this controller, don't take them as kind of like best practices or something of that sort. I just wanted to keep things very simple here, and I perform all the logic in the controller, which is not okay, but for demo purposes, I think it kind of like does the job. And once again, I have kept everything very procedural so that we really understand step by step what exactly do we do at each point in or while the application executes when a request comes in for this registration. And similar to the registration, we have this login. So let's take them one by one. First of all, we need to, well, inject a few different things here, like the app.dbContext. We need the user manager. We'll see exactly what we will use the user manager for. We need the role manager and the sign-in manager. All these services come from ASP.NET Core Identity, from Microsoft ASP.NET Core Identity. Then we also have our identity service. So that's the service that we have created by ourselves and that we use to kind of like generate the JSON Web Tokens themselves. Obviously, in the constructor, we just assign all these incoming parameters that will be injected to our fields. And now, here is what we do step by step. So first of all, when a request comes in to register a user, so what do we do? Well, we need to first create an identity user. Now, when we have this identity user, we can use the user manager to create the user, and this will persist. This will add the user, the identity user, to our database. But then we have in this register user model also first name and last name. Now, first name and last name are not properties that you can have in the ASP.NET users table. So what we want to do in this case, we want to persist and use the first name and the last name as claims for that specific user. So this means that whenever a new request comes in to register a user, we also need to take, well, the first name and the last name, and we create a new list of claims. Now, a claim is nothing else than a set of a key and a value that describes, okay, this is a key, like the first name, and what is the value for that. You can imagine this like being really kind of like a dictionary. Now, the idea is that what you can do here is that you can add no matter how many claims you want. Obviously, there are some things or concerns about the token sizes, so, well, you shouldn't really go really crazy with that, but still you can add this type of claims here. Now, the thing is, that if you just use kind of like a random list of claims and you add it here in the registration when you create a token, that would be nice because they will be returned, but let's say the user then kind of like, I don't know, logs out and 2 days later, the user wants to log in. Now, how do you take the first name and the last name? Because in the login, you will probably only have an email and a password. So that won't be possible. That's why we also need to persist these claims and let ASP.NET Core know that, hey, these are claims. And that's why we can use this user manager. And on the user manager, we have this add claims async method, in which we specify the identity user and the claims, the new claims that we want to add for that specific user. And this means that for each login request that comes in the future, we will be able to get those claims for the database and place them on the token. However, since we are here, or while we are doing the registration, there is also another information that we have in our register user, which is, well, the role. So here we have a very basic logic. We want to add the user to a role. Now, if the role does not exist, we want to create it. And that's why we have, okay, if the register user role equals administrator, in that case, we use the role manager to find the role name that's administrator. If we don't find it, then we just create that. So we use the role manager and then we can call this create async. Now, after we have created this role, if the role doesn't exist, we can use the user manager and add the identity to a specific role. And this will once again persist in the database that, hey, this specific user belongs to a specific roles. In the end, we also want to add this new role as a claim, but here it's important that we use the claim types role. This is important because when ASP.NET Core will look for roles in the token, it will look after claim types that have this role name, which is very important. So that's why we needed to add it with these roles. Now here we also have an else, because if the user is not the administrator, we want to obviously do the exact same things, only that in this case, we just want to apply this identity role, which is called user. And we also add the claim, and that should be it. Last but not least, what we need to do here during the registration is create a claims identity, and this will be used when we generate a JSON Web Token. And in this claims identity, we basically, well, create some new claims like the sub and the email. So this is what we take from our identity. But then to this claims identity, we add all the new claims that we have added so far, like the first name, last name, and also the role claim, which is important. Now, once we have everything basically on this claims identity, we can simply use our identity service to create the security token. And then we can basically create a new authentication result, which is also a type that I have created here. And it just returns the token. So we use the identity service to write the token, and it will return the base 64 version of the token, so a regular JSON Web Token. And then we return OK and that specific response. Now, this is the registration. When we have the login, things are very similar, but they are just a little bit different, because now what we get here is usually, if we can take a look at this, is just an email and a password. So we don't know all the claims and the roles of the user. However, we have ASP.NET Core Identity, and we have persisted all that information when we register the user, so we are covered with that. Because here we can, first of all, well, verify if the user exists, and if the user does not exist in our case, we just return a bad request. But then we also verify if the combination of email and password is correct, and if it is not correct, well, we also return a bad request. And to verify if the user exists, we can use the user manager. To verify the sign-in, or if the sign-in is successful, we can use the sign-in manager and this method check password sign-in async, in which we specify the user and the password, basically, and lockout on failure false, because I don't want right now to lock out my users. Now, if the result is not succeeded, then we return a bad request. But if it is succeeded, we kind of like go to the next step. So the next step is, for that specific user that we know it exists and we know the sign-in is successful, we need the claims. So we use the user manager to get the claims for that specific user. But we also need the roles. So we use the user manager to get the roles for the specific user. And then we do exactly the same thing that we have done also for the registration. We need to create a JSON Web Token for that. So first of all, we need the claims identity. On the claims identity, by default, we add this claim sub and the email. But then we add, well, the claims that we got. And for each role that we have in our roles, we want to also add the role claim. And then we just use our identity service, create security token, it will generate our token, and then the same identity service write token will return us the string version or the base64 format of this token, and we can just return response. And that's basically it, how you implement, let's say, authentication or JSON Web Token authentication in your ASP.NET Core Web API using two endpoints, the login and the register. Now, coming back to the authorization part of it, actually things are very, very easy. So I have this products controller here. And you see that on this products controller, I have decorated it like the controller itself with this authorize. Now, the authorize attribute, what it does, it instructs ASP.NET Core that each request to this controller should be at least authenticated, or it should come from an authenticated user. Now, what does this mean since we have implemented JSON Web Token authentication? Well, it means that all the requests that come to our endpoint, our products endpoint, need to have a header for authorization that contains a token, and the token should also be valid. So the authorize basically will check if the user is authenticated, and only authenticated users will be able to actually make call to this API. But we wanted to go one step further. And here in these products, we have implemented just two actions for now. We have implemented the get products. And for the get product, I want regular users to be able to get products, but I obviously also want administrators to be able to get products. So what you can very easily do, once again, without configuring anything, just by setting everything up, having the appropriate role claims and things that I have showed so far, you can just use this authorized and kind of like more granularly explain that for this action, I also want, in order to be able to be completed correctly, the roles for the request, for the user that made the request should be, well, either administrator or a user. However, for the post, like when we want to create a product, I want only administrators to be able to create products. So that's why here I have once again decorated this controller action with authorize, but in this case I have specified in my roles that I want only the administrator one to be able to make calls to that. So this will result in the fact that regular users will not be able to actually create any products, but they will be able to read or to check the existing products. And that's basically it. So let me run the application and let's see how everything works together. As you can see here, we have our Swagger user interface, and here you see that this is the authorize button. By default, this authorize button is not here. It appeared here only because we have configured Swagger to also know how to use and work with this type of authorization. And here we have for the account, we have the register. So we can maybe try it out, and let's maybe give here some email like user@example.com. Let's give it a password. Now the password, I have kept it very, very simple. Here the first name, let's give it here my name. For this one, also my last name. And for the role, I want to be an administrator, so I will leave 0. So if we execute this, we will see that we got the response, and here we actually get the token. Now let me just copy this token, and I would like to run the same request again, but in this case, let's call this user, it would be John. The password would be the same. Let's just call this user John here, the first name, and here it would be Joe, the last name. And here I want this to be just a regular user. So if we execute that, you see that we get a totally different token. So let me also copy that so that I have it at hand. We can come right now back to our Swagger UI, and here in this authorize, for the bearer, we can specify the token, in this case for the user, and click on authorize. And right now Swagger will know exactly that, hey, for each request that I want to make, I need to add this authorization header. So let's take a look first of like try it out for this get product, and we try to get a product, and we see that we already have a product in our database. But let's also try to post here. So let's try it out. Here, let's have my second product. Here, also my second product as well. And the price, let's give it a price tag like this. So if we click execute here, you'll see that I have received a 4034 bill. Because, hey, I right now use the token for the user. So the user is not allowed basically to create a new product. Only the administrator is allowed to do so. In the meantime, I have also copied to my clipboard the token for the administrator. So if I click here on authorize, I will click on logout and I will provide as value the token for the administrator and click authorize and then close. So let me go back to the product right now and let's try to post the product here. And you see that in this case, it was kind of like successful because I did receive this 200 OK response. And here, even if I'm administrators are also allowed to actually see the products. So you see that I can get all the products, I can see the previous product that was here, but also the product that I have added just now. And that's how simple it is to set up authentication and authorization in an ASP.NET Core Web API using JSON Web Tokens. Once again, don't forget, if you want to get access to the source code for this video, you will get the entire solution with everything that I have showed you here if you become or if you are a Code Wrinkles member on an ambassador tier. If you are not, then just hit the membership button and, well, get the membership. And if you already are an ambassador member, please make sure to check the membership tab on the Code Wrinkles YouTube channel to see or to get the information or to understand exactly how you can get access to the source code that I have showed in this video. Also, if you're for the first time here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you did enjoy this video, and also feel free to share it with your colleagues, with your peers, or with anybody that might find this video useful. If you have anything to say, any question, or just want to get a discussion started, don't be shy and head over to the comment section and just leave a comment and I would be more than happy to respond to it. This being said, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.